Well arrived, Gremlins. Today is Tuesday. If this was any other part of this expansion, this is the reset day. We will be talking about the new Mythic Plus affixes, the last week's worth of progression in the raid, the rankings of the raid and the Mythic Plus, but well, the expansion is over, nobody cares about what's going on in Shadowlands. Currently, all the talk is about what is going to happen in Dragonflight and what is happening in the development of Dragonflight. So, a couple of days ago, we stumbled upon this message from Blizzard, their talks on design, the design progress of the class and talent trees, telling us that they were moving away from continuing the design iteration of the talents and instead moving on to fixing the numbers, the tuning of the talent trees. This, as we mentioned, sparked some debate within the community, and amongst these debates there was of course the immediate reaction of, okay, which specs are getting it the best then? You know, which specs now are perfectly happy with Blizzard moving on to tuning numbers because they think their talent tree is doing just fine, and which of the other specs are in the opposite direction, which are the ones that are currently trying to commit seppuku because of the bad state their talent tree is in. This is where we come in, especially for players who have not really paid attention to this, have not really cared, especially because at the end of the day Dragonflight is still some 2 months away. Now we can come in to have a recap of the current situation of all of the specs and what do they have in their talent tree in terms of how it looks, just by going around and scouring the communities of these specs. How do they feel about these talents? It's important you remember the term is correct. How do they feel? At the moment this is still complete feelicraft. We don't know the numbers, we don't know how good these talents are. For example, you might be saying that a spec like Affliction is amazing while Arcane is garbage. However, maybe as soon as Blizzard is done with the tuning, as soon as we get the simulations out and we can start testing the specs, it turns out that Arcane is going to be stacked in the raid and be an S tier spec while Affliction will be garbage. How many people will care that Affliction has amazing talents, and how many people will care that Arcane is boring to play? That is kind of the question. At the end of the day, look at this. This is going to repeat itself in Dragonflight. Not with the same colors, sure, some other specs might be the meta specs and others will be the terrible ones, but that's what matters. Some other specs will be the terrible ones. You know, there are going to be the usual group of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 specs that will be considered bad and terrible. So even if we were in a fantasy world where somehow all of the specs manage to be balanced amazingly and all of the talents look great, even then there are still going to be 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 specs that will be bad. That's just how balance works. That's just how it is. So even with that being said, we can start taking a look at how all of these talent trees have been, I guess, received by the respective communities about all of these specs. So let's start with one of the least controversial ones right off the bat, which is Mage. Mage has gotten quite a good amount of responses, in particular for Fire. I know this sounds repetitive because Fire Mage has gotten praised and somehow ends up being good most of the times, somehow, out of all of the Mage specs. So Fire Mage for now is somewhere in between here, more or less, with Arcane slightly below. Arcane has not been historically very popular. even if it's considered a good spec with a good amount of options, it's unlikely it's gonna become very popular anyways, so I don't have much faith for Arcane anyways. Frost Mage is the one that has been met with the most amount of, I guess, resistance, mostly because of how simple it was in Shadowlands, and now that you have the opportunity to change so many things in Dragonflight, it still feels like it doesn't have a clear direction compared to how it played before, so it's not nearly as good. Then you have immediately jumping back up to the good positive reactions that are Shaman. This is something you might have seen because every single time there is any news posted for any class or spec, you will find players complaining, why does my spec not look as good as Shaman? This has been the general answer that players gave every time Blizzard updated them with some news about their specs. So we can more or less at the moment keep Shaman here as being the overall most well designed out of all of the talents. I have my own issues. Particularly with restoration. I wouldn't put it here, but overall these have been the responses for the communities, for the talents of Shaman. Going the opposite direction, you have another class that has been talked about a lot. We as well talked about this class a lot, which is Priest. Priest has received a whole lot of changes, and despite the whole lot of changes, I'm still not too sold on how it works, even despite all of the different iterations of the talents for Blizzard. So I'm currently not very happy about how Priest has been designed. I also realized just now that this is not supposed to be the right kind of holy. This is the right kind of holy. This is how it looks like. I think Shadow Priest is the one that looks the best because it has gotten the better changes compared to Discipline and Holy. They still suffer mainly from the lack of interrupt in Mythic Plus as well. That's a big point of concern for Priest players. So that's where they currently stand as a whole. Now, moving on to a little bit of a bigger divide, which is Paladin. So Paladin has Protection Paladin higher of the three right here. I have seen complaints for Paladin, for Protection Paladin, however, that is the wrong type of complaint. Your type of complaint for Paladin is gonna happen here. The main complaint, if you don't play Paladin and if you don't play Protection, is that many of their talents as Protection don't even work. Like, they're not even testable, they're not even usable. That's the kind of balancing that goes on here. Fixing the talents, tuning the numbers, etc, etc. As far as the design of the actual tree, it looks good. It has many more improvements on the strength of Protection Paladin, way more defensiveness, way more DR available to Port Paladin to make it tankier. So I think of the Paladin, it's easily the better one of the three. Then you have Red Paladin. I think Red Paladin is a decent big mech. Red Paladin players are not too happy about it, but in general, it's mostly because there hasn't been anything particularly shiny. It has gotten quite a good amount of things for their damage, which is of course going to keep players on edge until they get the numbers out, until you actually know what that damage is, because we don't know. If you were to ask me who does more damage, a Red Paladin or an Enhancement Shaman in Dragonflight, I can't tell. Nobody can. It's very difficult. So besides that, I think Red Paladin is doing okay. Nothing great, but okay. Who is not doing okay is the actual right kind of holy this time, Holy Paladin. For me, I said I wouldn't put Shaman, Resto Shaman here myself personally. I just placed it there because the general idea of Resto Shaman is very good. For Holy Paladin, I do the opposite. The general response from the community would likely be somewhere around here. Me, personally, it's gonna go down here. I just don't like, I'm not a fan, I will repeat it, of the plan of Blizzard to split their choices between the caster side and the melee side. I think it's gonna be way too complicated. I think they needed to decide on which of the two they wanted to focus on, rather than trying to make this hybrid choice work. So I'm not a fan whatsoever of the way Holy Paladin has been tried in the Dragonflight beta. After Paladin, you have a surprising new entry amongst the rank of the well-designed, which is Warrior. Warrior has gotten much better over time because of the amount of changes they received from Blizzard. One is Protection Warrior, doing very well. Their talent tree is very well polished, as well as Arms and Fury. Not quite as well as Protection. Maybe we are victims of the bad state of Protection from Shadowlands, so they think that now it's even more amazing, where Fury and Arms are a little bit less because they weren't nearly as bad. Even without not being nearly as bad as Protection in Shadowlands, they are still doing quite fine right now, both Arms and Fury. Personally, I'm more of a fan of the Arms tree than the Fury tree, especially since they got rid of the War Banner drama for Warrior, only available to one of the two DPS specs. Now War Banner is out completely, so there is not even that to be worried about for Warriors. Talking about good results right now is Death Knight. Again, without knowing the amount of damage they can do, without knowing how tanky Blood Death Knight is, just looking at the layout of the trees, how they have responded to the community feedback and how they changed things in the Death Knight, overall, all three specs are doing quite fine. I still think overall I would put Blood ahead, purely because of how powerful it was before and how strong the tree looks now, considering you already know all of the powerful things Blood Death Knight already had. No real worries, I would say, for the DK specs when it comes to Blizzard saying that they're gonna move on and start thinking about numbers. I think they're in a perfectly acceptable position, all three specs right now. Somewhat the same can be said about Warlocks. I think, while personally I'm still not a fan of the Destro and the reworked Tree of Affliction, I think they're still okay overall. Demonology, I think it's the better one of the three in terms of even in terms of options. Yeah, the whole swarm of demons thing they are trying to give to Demonology, it might end up being completely worthless, it might end up having not enough damage, but that's not what we are looking at right now. We are purely looking at the polish of the talents, and Demo looks, I think, better than the other two Warlock specs. Talking about the differences within the same class, we now have the biggest of the gaps, the largest of the differences, which is Druid. Let's start with the average one. Let's start with Restoration Druid. I think it's okay. I think it's good. It hasn't been changed massively, while it was still already doing fine before. What has been changing more is Balance and Feral Druid, even without seeing how it actually works in game, and even without being a fan of the way their mastery and their eclipse has been reworked. The choices now given to the Balanced Druid 3 are much better than what they had before, than the state they were in before. Feral Druid also has gotten much more polished than before. It's in a much more clear, near finished state compared to before, and no need to be as worried anymore, moving away from the design iteration of the talent trees of Blizzard. However, there is one left in Druid, which is Guardian. Guardian is the exact opposite of what happened to the other three Druid specs, because it has not been changed, basically. From where they were once we made a video about Guardian like 6 weeks ago, it's basically still the same. It hasn't really been touched. So that's one of the big concerns. If you were a Druid main, a Guardian Druid main, reading this, saying Blizzard is not going to move about tuning numbers, you have to be worried if you were a Guardian Druid. Then we have Monk. The interesting thing about Monk is that Brewmaster, this thing right here, is almost in the same state as Guardian. Which state? The state where they haven't really been touched. The talent tree of Brewmaster, I think, got one pass, like 1 week after coming out, and that was it. It was basically not touched ever since. The difference is that the initial iteration of the tree of Brewmaster was good enough, was already polished enough to be very good, to be very well received from the Brewmaster community. Brewmaster had already ways to be quite tanky, and now several of the things offered to them in the tree have made them even more so, potentially. So even without getting changed that many times, as proof that you don't need to be a damned holy priest, discipline priest, or shadow priest to become better because you get plenty of changes, their tree still looks very good. Windwalker is in a similar, albeit not as great of a situation. They definitely have gotten way different ways to be more useful in different scenarios compared to the AoE bot they have been for ever, really. That's what Windwalker Monk was. So I think they also look much better than before. However, there is still a gap of Mistweaver Monk. I'm not sold on the way Mistweaver Monk plays right now. Perhaps it's similar to the preconceived notions and the stereotypes of, Protection Warrior was bad in Shadowlands, so it doesn't look as good as now in Dragonflight. It doesn't work for Prot, but for Mistweaver, I'm not as excited in how it works. I did say, if there is one thing to be positive about Mistweaver, is that they do look to have one of the better damage outputs in Mythic Plus compared to the other healers. That's one thing that they have, because plenty of other healers are losing a lot of the ways they used to do damage with in Shadowlands, whereas Mistweaver, not really. So that's one thing I would be hopeful for Mistweaver. Now we are left with three classes: Rogue, Hunter, and Demon Hunter. Hunter. So Hunter is a class which, if possible, has become even more disliked by the player base, simply because every time they reload their news site or their Twitter or their WoW forums or Discord feeds and they see a blue post or news about a class change, 50% of the time it was a class change for Hunter. That's, I'm pretty sure, what triggered players to get even more pissed at Hunter players. So it is at the very least expected that after 74 changes each, these 3 specs now look much more manageable. I am still less sold on marksmanship than I am on the other 2 specs. I think both BM I think both BM and survival look much better. You still have to play with what you are given. So you're still a hunter, you still have few buttons, you still have simple rotations. This is not something that is going to get changed by the talents. Okay, it's not that because BM is here, it's here because they now have 6 different abilities, a very fluid and diverse rotation. No, it's not the case, but it is a significantly more polished and fleshed out talent tree that would make sense to move into the phase of balancing and tuning the numbers like Blizzard is saying they will do. That's the point. The last of the pure DPS classes is Rogue. Rogue also has received plenty of changes. Rogue also has received a raid buff, which will make them near mandatory in Dragonflight, so Rogue is looking fine. I think I haven't seen too many complaints from the Rogue community, complaints related to this. Not complaints like, oh yeah, my tree is absolutely perfect, I wouldn't want to change a thing. Even I, for Elemental or Resto Shaman, I would want to change 4 or 5 things in their tree, certainly. But overall, it's still great. So are the rogue trees, they are doing just fine right now. Personally, from what I could look, I like the assassination tree more. Maybe because assassination is the most binary of the specs in Shadowlands. Single target, that's the only lane they run in. So seeing that they have way more options for doing other things in Dragonflight, it's much more exciting to me than the both Outlaw and Subtlety, which I'm not as excited for compared to Assassination, but overall all 3 specs are doing just fine. Lastly, we have the 2 Demon Hunter specs. Most of the complaints coming from the community and the general look to the Demon Hunter trees were not as major. It wasn't some great like complete break of the entire way they play, like the spec doesn't work, like for example if you were to complain about Guardian Druid or Holy Paladin, it was much less heavy in terms of gravity. So not nearly as bad. I would put them both here. They are edible, I would say, as food, but still not exciting. I can still see them myself, the complaints that I was seeing, you know, having too much of a split between the AoE and the single target tree for Havoc Demon Hunter, for example, is a complaint. It definitely doesn't make the spec unplayable or like broken, but it is still something of a pet peeve, something you would like to see fixed before the release, but nothing too awful, I would say. This leaves us with this entire finished picture with the state of the specs. So I would say from the get-go that any of the specs above this line don't really need to worry about the statement from Blizzard about no longer spending the majority of their time on the design iteration of the new talent trees and instead focusing more on numbers. The bottom 2 rows, I think, would have to be worried getting into Dragonflight in this current iteration. So basically the healers of Priest, the healer of Paladin, Guardian Druid and Frost Mage would be the ones I believe are in a worse situation right now. And then this one is debatable. The edible tree, yes, it's something edible, but it's very varying depending on your preferences and your tastes. I personally think Shadow Priest is fine to eat. However, I don't believe both Destroy and Affliction should go live this way. Other players might have the complete opposite reaction to these 3 specs, for example. Same can be said for something like Resto Druid and Mistweaver Monk as healer specs. Maybe to some, Resto Druid is perfectly fine, it's even more strong than before, while Mistweaver is garbage, or perhaps the opposite. Overall, we can see that easily nearing 60+%, 70% maybe even of the specs are fine, are in a situation where they are ready to start being tuned in terms of numbers, in terms of let's look if this talent right here compared to this talent right here is similar in power, or if we have to nerf one and buff the other, for example, rather than actually redesigning the entire trees. It's only the 30-ish% of the talents towards the bottom that might need some more further tuning in terms of design philosophy, design choice, etc, etc. So that is the current situation, I believe, more or less, that we find ourselves with our talents for Dragonflight. As I said, in case we start getting a little bit too pessimistic, as a reminder, remember that Blizzard says they are going away, they are transitioning away from spending the majority of our time. So there is still some time being spent on iterating different design choices for trees. For example, spending the majority of our time on numbers tuning could mean spending our time tuning the numbers of all of the specs of these 4 rows, while the smaller part of the time will be spent on designing the trees for these 5, for example. That could be the best case scenario I am hoping will happen with the continuous development of Dragonflight. So, with this being said, for now, we can stop here with this snapshot picture of how the talents are currently looking at. I would like to revisit this in a month, I would say, just to see how things changed. I surely hope none of these specs end up getting dropped down because they get changed the wrong way and they become worse. I'm more looking at the bottom 3 rows. I'm more looking at the edible, the actually poisonous talent trees, and then the ones where literally there is barely even a tree to begin with, to see in a month how many of these have gotten changed for the better overall. Keeping this in mind for the future, we can now stop here on this Tuesday. Of course, as usual, a round of boisterous applause to all of my patrons for supporting me and allowing me to continue to produce content for WoW for all of you as we get deeper and deeper into the beta of Dragonflight, and more interesting things will soon happen with the balancing of each and every spec. We can start testing them in game and getting into the good part of the beta of an expansion, the numbers, the catch the meta spec before the release minigame. That will be very entertaining. For now, we have to wait. Of course, for further support, you can like and comment down below, as well as subscribing to this very channel, of course. That would help a lot as well. And lastly, for more further social interactions and general simping, you can follow me on Twitter, as well as subscribing to my Patreon right around these links. Now, with that being said, it's time to leave. Thank you again, of course, guys, for watching. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, I don't know. I woke up at 11 a.m. It's news to me, honestly. Waking up before noon, even waking up before 2 p.m., it's actually kind of a rarity, but 11 a.m. Now I am kind of spooked, because when am I supposed to go to sleep now?